Man of Steel has proven to be as vulnerable as the mere mortals who've looked up to him for more than half a century. Superman died Wednesday.
There are few moments as memorable, iconic, or culturally significant as the closing pages of January 1993's Superman issue 75, where after a climactic battle against the hulking monster Doomsday, Superman, the most famous and beloved comic book character of all time, succumbs to his wounds and dies. In both the comic world and in the real world, a deafening silence fell. The whole planet collectively mourned the loss of its greatest hero. The Death of Superman story from DC Comics is one of the most instantly recognisable events in all of comic book history. I challenge you to find someone who hasn't at least heard of the time Superman was killed. This story was a tremendous success for DC, revitalising the company's sales at a time when Marvel was dominating the industry. But despite this, it could be said that in the long term, the Death of Superman story actually set the precedent for a form of storytelling that would negatively impact comics throughout the late 1990s and beyond. Either way, this story's legacy in itself is far-reaching and stands today as one of the most iconic moments in the history of modern fiction. So in this two-part video series, I want to analyse how such a story ever came to be, explore the state of DC Comics in the early 1990s, and try to find out just how things got to a situation where DC had to allow their greatest hero to die, just so the company could survive. Okay, so in order to explain just how the Death of Superman actually came into existence, I think we should first outline the state of both DC Comics and the comic book industry at the turn of the decade. The early 1990s was not a kind era for DC Comics, as the company found themselves lagging behind Marvel Comics in the sales, so much so that by 1991, DC's share of the market was only an estimated 20%. Now, this negative trend continued into the following year, as DC's slump saw the company also fall behind independent comic book company Malibu, marking the first time that a third party had outsold one of the two industry titans. As DC's former editor Dan Raspler explains,
"In the early 90s, Marvel consistently had the whole top 10. There was an inferiority complex that we all permanently had. Even Marvel's non-important titles would still be outselling important DC titles on a consistent basis."
As you can imagine, DC were desperate to fight out of their slump and reclaim the top spots in the industry. And to do so, they figured they needed a story that would shake the comic book landscape to its very core. So, in late 1992, the company assembled a team of its most acclaimed and accredited writers to work together in creating a story so shocking that it wouldn't just boost their sales and win back comic book fans, but make headline news across mainstream media. Their plan? Take their traditionally most popular and well-known character, Superman, whose sales were also stagnating in the years following John Byrne's departure from the series, and drastically change the character's status quo in the most unthinkable way possible. It was time for the Man of Steel to get married. While this may not sound as earth-shattering as what they ended up doing, the idea of finally having Clark Kent tie the knot with Lois Lane was quite noteworthy at the time, offering a resolve to their 50-year will-they-won't-they relationship, and taking cues from Marvel's success in marrying Peter and MJ in 1987's The Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21. Everything was in motion for this to work. Writers began ramping up the romantic tensions between Clark and Lois, with the planned culmination taking place in June of 1993's Adventures of Superman issue 500. But then came a problem. You see, the comic book writers weren't the only people seeking a big Superman story at the time, as the recently developed ABC sitcom show Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman was also planning on focusing on this same aspect of the pair's relationship, climaxing with an epic wedding at the show's finale. As a result, DC president Jeanette Kahn told the comic writers that their wedding would have to coincide with the TV shows, thereby forcing them to scrap their plans and go back to the drawing board. Now this, as you can imagine, was incredibly frustrating for the creative team at DC, who by this point felt overworked, exhausted, and bluntly out of ideas. And it was out of this frustration that longtime Superman writer Jerry Ordway said 4 fateful words that would go on to change the course of both the Man of Steel's life and the comic book industry as a whole, when he stood up and simply said,
"Just kill him!"
Now, this was by no means the first time that Ordway had proposed such an idea. In fact, it became something of a running joke amongst the writers at the time.
The famous last words from Jerry Ordway were, "Let's just kill him," which Jerry said at every single meeting whenever somebody would get stuck. When we would sit there with blank chart to fill, he would say, "Let's just kill him."
But in this moment, nobody laughed, but instead actually contemplated the idea. Louise Simonson, then writer of Superman the Man of Steel, recounted her experiences working on the X-Men series for Marvel, telling the group that
killing a major character shows just how much that character means to his friends, family, enemies, to the whole world.
It was Mike Carlin, then group editor for all Superman titles, who gave the go-ahead for the death of Superman to be fully fleshed out. He recounts his reasoning behind this, stating that
the world was taking Superman for granted, so we literally said, let's show what the world would be like without Superman.
And with that, the decision was made. They would kill the Man of Steel in Superman issue 75 of January 1993, and then resurrect him later that year in Adventures of Superman 500. While this death was never meant to be permanent, the plan was for those 5 months to treat it as so, and DC would reap the rewards of a world in mourning of its most famous superhero. With the master plan now decided upon, the Superman writers had to devise a way for the last son of Krypton to actually die, and figure out who would be the one to end the hero's life. They ultimately decided that none of Superman's existing villains were believable enough to be the one to kill him, and so a new antagonist was required to do the job. The writers had to come up with Superman's Doomsday, as Mike Carlin's infamous whiteboard described it, and they quite literally did just that. It was Dan Jurgens, who would later write the climactic issue of the death of Superman's story, who would ultimately bring to life the Doomsday character we later became familiar with. Jurgens envisaged Superman's heroic sacrifice being a physical test like no other, and to achieve this, he needed to fight something more physically threatening than any of his existing rogues, and so this genetically engineered Kryptonian deformity was born to achieve one simple task: kill the Man of Tomorrow. With a premise decided and the plan set for both how Superman would die and who would be the one to kill him, DC began to put in motion their master plan. The first tease was released at the end of Superman the Man of Steel issue 17 from November 1992, where after the conclusion of the comic's actual story, the final page teased the debut of the mysterious hulking menace Doomsday, with the subsequent issue formally introducing the new villain, breaking free from captivity and wreaking havoc across America, leading to a confrontation with the Justice League in JLA issue 69. Now, Doomsday single-handedly destroys the League and punches Booster Gold literally into space, where he's rescued by Superman, and when Superman asks who's attacked him, Booster simply replies, "It's like Doomsday in here," setting up for an epic showdown between the two in Superman issues 74 and 75, 2 issues which feature a gargantuan clash between the unstoppable force and a movable object. At the end of Superman issue 75 though, neither Superman or Doomsday are able to fully stop one another, and in a last-ditch attempt to finally bring their foe down, they both swing for one final punch. Superman, with all of his tremendous might, loads his fist at the menacing creature, with enough force to finally take it down. He succeeds, but with that, he too is mortally wounded. Superman falls into the arms of Lois Lane as the whole world watches on and succumbs to his wounds and quietly passes away. Superman was now dead. DC had gone all in on their last-ditch attempt to revitalise their sales. The ace up their sleeve had been slid onto the table, but had it paid off? You only get one chance to tell a story like the death of Superman, but would people really believe and accept it? This was a make or break moment for the company. Thankfully, it worked. Superman issue 75 was released boldly declaring its intent on the cover, the infamous image of Superman's tattered cape wrapped around a pole, marking a makeshift grave for the now fallen hero. In terms of sales, Superman issue 75 was a monumental success, selling an estimated 4 million units and becoming both the best-selling comic book of the year and also the highest-selling Superman comic of all time. In one move, DC had also doubled their market share almost overnight, rising to a 31% share, while Marvel found themselves plummeting down to around 17%. By sacrificing their greatest hero, DC Comics were once again on top of the world. But what would come next would ultimately leave the company and the comic book industry as a whole crashing back down to reality, as they now had to try and execute the second part of their plan and bring back Superman. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know what your thoughts were on the death of Superman storyline and everything at DC Comics that led up to this monumental event taking place. As you can probably see, this video is the start of a two-part series, so tune back on the channel in 2 weeks' time for the second part of the series, where we're going to look at the resurrection and return of Superman. If you enjoyed this video though, in the meantime there are some other videos on screen that you might also enjoy, and if you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please consider subscribing, it helps us out a great deal. I want to thank everyone who lent their voices in the video, to Laron, to Matt, to Michaela and to Scott. All their links to social media and YouTubes and Twitters will be in the description. Go check them out, they're all amazing. If you want to support the channel and help me make more videos, you can do so on Patreon. There should be a link on screen as well. And if you want some more of me, you can just follow me on Twitter at Owen Likes Comics. That's all for this video though. Thanks for watching and I will see you next time. And so until then, take care and keep reading.